Fire is a natural part of our environment here in Montana. It's a force for change, for rebirth, and for cleansing. Fire, even on a large scale, has an undeniable beauty. But it's a fearsome thing too. And every few years, we are reminded about just how powerful fire can be, and how much it can affect where we live, where we work, and where we play. Whenever fire comes to Montana on a large scale, we look at the ashes and ask questions. How could so much fire come all at once? Can we do more to prepare for it? How should we deal with its aftermath? And can we do more to keep it away from what we value most? After the fires of 2000, those questions are being asked again. And perhaps more than ever before, Montanans are looking for answers and for lessons in the ashes. Production assistance for Firewatch 2001 has been provided by a grant from the Greater Montana Foundation. Hello again, everyone. 1910, 1988, 2000. Summers that literally burned themselves into our collective memory. Will 2001 be another milestone? Quite honestly, it's too soon to know, but the potential exists for back-to-back years of extreme fire. So, are we ready? And are we learning the lessons of last year's fires? Over the next hour, I'll offer some answers from the people who fight fire and from the people who work to prevent fire. I'll look at how state and federal land managers have responded to last year's blazes, and I'll look at how some private landowners have addressed challenges on their own property. I'll begin right after these words. No one can accurately predict what the fire season of 2001 will bring, but we do know the potential exists because of weather conditions so far this year. Montana entered the spring of 2001 with below average snowpack in the mountains. On these charts, the thin green line represents the 30-year average snowpack from 1961 through 1990. The thicker blue line represents this year's snowpack. As you can see, it flirts with the 30-year minimum in the Kootenai River drainage, in the Upper Clark Fork, the Bitterroot, and the Missouri headwaters. Among other things, less snow means the mountain environment becomes drier faster. Winter was followed by a warm and dry spring. By mid-May, temperatures soared above normal. All major reporting weather stations reported below normal moisture for the calendar year, with central Montana the driest. Out on the ground, forest fuels were drying out, and early season fires broke out in several parts of the state. June brought welcome rain and even snow, and fire danger dropped. But even a moist early summer can be somewhat deceptive, since fire danger may not peak until August or even September. Now, in mid-July, fire danger is generally considered moderate, but a prolonged hot, dry spell could make things much more dangerous. But the people in charge of firefighting for Montana and the Northern Rockies say they're ready. When wildfire strikes, America's firefighting arsenal contains a little bit of everything. Smoke jumpers, hotshot crews, airplanes, fire engines, teams from Indian reservations, teams from volunteer fire departments. During last year's Summer of Fire, Montanans could find firefighters from across the United States and from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. By far, the greatest force in firefighting is the United States government. And for fiscal year 2001, Uncle Sam has dipped deeper to prepare for another long, hot summer.
We are expecting another difficult fire season. All the indications, all the indices, the relative moisture, drought conditions we're in indicate we could have another tough season.
For the Forest Service alone in 2001, Congress has allocated more than $500 million new dollars for firefighting operations, another $276 million for emergencies, and more than $200 million for fire preparedness. In all, more than $1 billion new dollars are flowing into the National Fire Plan this year, just for the Forest Service. So what will the plan mean specifically for Montana and the Northern Rockies? Put simply, more of everything.
Well, let's see, almost a doubling of the number of fire trucks that we're going to have available. We're going from 74 last year to about 118 this year. More than a doubling of firefighters, 460 last year to 944 this year.
Mike Pattee is in charge of overseeing the National Fire Plan in the northern region of the Forest Service. According to the agency, more than $44 million will be spent in Montana alone this year. There's no magic number in firefighting, but there is MEL, or most efficient level. And this new money will bring the Forest Service up to where it should be.
It's a combination of people, equipment, facilities, and aircraft. Over the last year or so, we were at about funded to be at about 67, 70% of that most efficient level. As a result of, partly as a result of the last fire season, the Congress has funded the organization, or the Forest Service at any rate, to be at 100% of that most efficient level.
So what will that money buy specifically for Montana? To begin with, of 944 firefighters region-wide, 730 will be based within the state. The budget also calls for a new 20-person hotshot crew for attacking new fires, and money to train more incident commanders and overhead personnel, the fire bosses who were in such short supply last August. The Forest Service also is investing in steel, brick, and concrete. A new air tanker base will be built at the Helena Airport. Meanwhile, the Forest Service is acquiring, upgrading, or building aircraft hangars, helicopter bases, storage units, crew quarters, and other facilities around western Montana. The upgrade in firefighting isn't just for this year. The increases will become a permanent part of the Forest Service's fire operations, even in years when fire is not a big issue.
There are going to be some seasons, if it rains all summer, where people are not going to be fighting fire. But a lot of these people are and will be employed doing other types of work while they're on standby waiting for fire to start. So these people can and will be used productively for hazardous fuel treatments, hand work, reducing fire hazards around communities or key resource areas. We have to monitor the investment we're making in those permanent resources, but that's what that most efficient level analysis is all about.
While Pattee will watch over the National Fire Plan for Montana and the Northern Rockies, in Washington, D.C., the plan will be overseen at the top by other Montanans, including the new chief of the Forest Service, Dale Bosworth, and Jerry Williams, who recently left Northern Region headquarters to become the National Director for Fire and Aviation. Williams, for one, is worried.
Our firefighting assets have always been a white hat of the organization. The capacity and the capabilities of people, whether a hotshot crew or a smoke jumper or an air tanker pilot or a crew boss or a prevention tech, they're among the best in the world. What we're finding, though, is that the scope and extent and the magnitude of the fire problem that we're dealing with throughout much of the country is overwhelming even to the best.
Another point, while Williams can move people and resources where they're needed most, in a given year the majority of firefighting resources are concentrated in only a few places.
It's a relatively small percentage of the fires that cause us the biggest problem. Even last year we were successful in about 96% of all the fires that started we were able to catch at small size. It's a relatively small percentage of that total. Last year about 4% that accounted for about 70% of all the costs and close to 90% of the total acres burned.
And when that small percentage of fires grow unmanageable, no amount of manpower or machinery will be enough.
Do you think the public understands that?
I think some of our publics do. I think it's difficult for a lot of other people to understand why we just don't throw more at it. That's a big problem. In a way, it's similar to standing on the beach trying to pick up a hurricane.
Making decisions on fire policy can be even tougher. Last summer, fire commanders made their priorities clear.
Our priority again has been on human life first, and then we're looking at our community and home protection after that, and at a point where we can ensure that those are true, so then we're largely looking to the resource protection. It's going to be a tremendous impact on our natural resources in this area. We all recognize that.
What that meant was that fire managers were willing to sacrifice large amounts of forest resources to save homes. And Williams says that won't change this year.
That's really an issue that society at large needs to settle on. Right now, the social priorities, the political priorities are to protect lives and property. That's reasonable given the situation that confronts us. Now, certainly, the trade-offs that are occurring are becoming enormous. To protect a home may also result in writing off or losing significant acres of national forest. Nobody likes this situation. For many of us that are forced to make those decisions, it's one of the most uncomfortable decisions that we make.
If you're looking for the tools to fight fire, this is the place to come.
Well, this is pretty simple fence post tapper. Hoses. We have three sizes of hose, inch hose, 1.5-inch hose, and our 3/4-inch garden hose. Right here are the smoke jumper packs. It's a two-person.
Pat Nooney manages the fire cache at Missoula's Aerial Fire Depot. It's one of many national fire supply warehouses scattered across the country.
This cache serves the states of Montana and Idaho and North Dakota, 5 federal agencies, as well as county and local fire departments.
Also, as a national cache, the equipment stored here can be sent clear across the country. It's a system that was improved and refined following the 1988 fire season, when equipment shortages became common.
The biggest lesson out of that fire season was the need to cooperate more fully on a larger scale and to look at ourselves as a system rather than as individual players on the field by themselves.
Here, today, there's little talk of shortages or of huge increases in equipment. That's because in 2000, the supply chain functioned well, with very few shortfalls.
But in some areas, clothing, particularly fire pants, hose, pumps, and all the fittings required, those are short of supply.
This year, the major increases in stock are in tents and first aid stations. In all, the equipment in this warehouse can outfit 12,500 firefighters for 24 hours. Then, if needed, more supplies can be brought in from other warehouses in the region or across the country. Conversely, if the action is somewhere else in the country, Missoula can supply firefighters there.
For example, starting 3 years ago with the Florida drought, large fires down there, they established a second cache down there in Lake City, Florida. Much of our stuff went to Lake City. It sat down there for 3 months, I believe. And then the fire season has moved up this way. Our equipment came following right behind it.
In other words, just the way it's supposed to. For much of the month of August last year, the attention of Montana and America was focused on the Bitterroot Valley. Even the rest of the world took notice. It's very likely that the Bitterroot will again be at the center in the coming months, not because of what's burning, but because of how forest managers are addressing last year's fires. The National Fire Plan includes money for rehabilitation and for reducing the risk of large fires on the national forests. The Bitterroot promises to be a showcase for that work and for the debate over how much management is necessary and how many trees should be cut. The Bitterroot Valley had never experienced fires like those of 2000. 300,000 acres touched in some way by the flames, dozens of homes destroyed, vast amounts of timber blackened, even in areas like Robbins Gulch that had been managed to prevent it.
You know, this entire area had been very heavily managed. Much of the area that was not logged had been underburned, and in areas like this, it made no difference if there was very much dead fuel on the ground or not. They just went. Nobody was up here to prove it, but this drainage probably burned out in an hour or less.
The scope of the fires created a huge challenge for forest managers once the flames subsided. Erosion now became the enemy. On the Bitterroot Forest, rehabilitation crews outnumbered firefighters. They installed new culverts to handle the expected increase in runoff from burned slopes. On hillsides, crews sawed down burned trees and placed miles of straw and mesh wattles to keep soil and ash from washing into stream systems. Efforts were made on private land too, largely through the Bitterroot Interagency and Community Recovery Team, or BIRT.
The lodgepole were in there, so the other two species will be what you guys will be planting. And they both are native to this area. If you look, these trees that are burned right now, these were the ponderosa pine in this site. And so we're kind of site selecting these today. It's called micro-siting them. We're going to look for places where the trees will have a better chance of recovering.
Forest managers also must come to grips with a more complicated and politically sensitive issue: what to do with huge amounts of burned trees. So far, the only publicly owned salvage timber to come out of the Bitterroot has come from the Sula State Forest, which by law is managed to produce money for schools, and where land managers have sold 18 million board feet of burned but usable timber.
If we just left the trees here, in a couple of years they will have lost their value and won't be of any value to the schools of Montana. And it'll take 80 to 100 years for these lands to produce revenue for the schools again.
For national forest managers, the situation is more complicated. But at every level of the Forest Service, the theme following the fires of 2000 is the same. There are simply too many trees, burned and living.
We essentially have an epidemic of trees on the Bitterroot National Forest caused by fire exclusion for many, many years. And when we burn up a stand like we did, a hot fire, we have a lot of standing fuel. It's going to burn again.
The National Fire Plan includes new money for hazardous fuel and forest health projects, including more than $7 million for Montana forests. Both the Bitterroot and Lolo National Forests have issued proposals for removing trees from burned areas. The Bitterroot also has created a pair of demonstration projects to show what fuel reduction might look like. In May, the Bitterroot released a draft environmental impact statement proposing to reduce fuel by harvesting some 270 million board feet of timber on 73,000 acres of burned land.
When we designed our project, we didn't know how many board feet we were designing for. We were looking at current fuel loadings. We have to also remember that we're only treating about 20% of the forest, 20% of the area that burned in the fires of 2000. And even on those acres, we're leaving a fair amount of wood behind. So it's not like we're taking all the biomass off the site.
Nature has its own way of recovering, and in general, after a fire, nature pretty much takes care of itself, really except for where damage was done by some human activity before the fire. And that's where we really need to focus our rehabilitation efforts.
We will have fire in this forest until we thin it and reduce the fuel loading so that it will be more fire resistant. This is about agriculture, this is about science, this is about plants.
It's also worth noting that the Forest Service wants to use fire itself more often to reduce hazardous fuel. But no matter what technique is used, the task now is to convince the public.
Some people don't trust us. Some people don't believe that we're credible for whatever reason. There's a good deal of division in society and in their beliefs of how these ecosystems work. This strategy is not without risk. I think any of us that have been in this business for any time at all recognize that. What we're seeing, though, is that the risks of inaction or the risks of not getting out ahead of this are much greater over time.
It's still too early to know just how much of Montana's burned timber will become lumber in the mill. As we've seen, the Forest Service still has significant amounts of public process and public discussion ahead before final decisions are made. Meanwhile, the state has been aggressive about selling its fire-killed trees, and so have many private landowners. In this portion of our program, we'll look at one forester's approach to land at Canyon Ferry Reservoir. We'll also ride along with a log truck in the Bitterroot. But first, we reconnect with two people we met last summer west of Missoula. Last August, Ralph and Betty Thisted watched fire in the 9 Mile Valley draw closer to their beloved and historic forest cabin.
It sounded, well, I've heard people say a freight train, and that's probably what it was, a steady roar, and there was a wall of fire right there.
With chainsaws, water, and fire-retardant foam, firefighters and loggers helped the Thisteds save the 80-year-old structure. But while the cabin survived, the fire turned much of the forest around it to char and ash. Chemical reactions in the soil created a water-resistant or hydrophobic layer underneath the soft ash. And so the Thisteds were left to decide what to do next.
We already have a forester and lined up and logging, and as soon as we get into the woods, we'll start getting rid of the dead fire-killed trees.
Today, more than 9 months after the fire, the differences on the Thisteds' property are striking. Over the winter, loggers removed 3 million board feet of spruce and larch. That work also broke through the hydrophobic layer of soil, allowing water to filter downward into the ground, instead of carrying ash into nearby Burnt Fork Creek.
I think it's noteworthy how clear the stream is for the muddy banks and the lack of vegetation. It's almost crystal clear water.
This spring, Ralph and Betty have been attending to life on the forest floor. On this day, they look for new morel mushrooms sprouting around a burned stump.
There's a lot of big ones here, Betty.
Where?
Right here. In that hollow and one here.
They also plant shrubs along the creek.
Here, Betty, I got a hole over here.
This is the only way to plant them, Betty.
I know it. I know it.
There's a lot of green grass poking up. And
maybe some ferns are coming, and it's a surprise. It's better than maybe we certainly thought in last, September.
Last fall, the Thisteds spoke about using their property as a kind of educational center about fire and forests. Since then, they've welcomed groups ranging from the Chamber of Commerce to soil experts to school children. And they're not done yet.
Anytime there's tremendous change, you've got to look at things in a completely different way. It's no good to go back and cry over spilt milk. It's the opportunity that you're given is to see this land and these trees in a new way. And that's what we tried to do.
Well, some of these, through the centuries, this has burned many times, I'm sure, this area, and it's always come back. These trees weren't planted by people, they were native trees, and that's what I'd like to see come back again.
In the fire season of 2000, the first fires to destroy homes burned near the shores of Canyon Ferry Reservoir between Helena and Townsend. Once those fires were out, professional forester Dan Pittman was among those called in to help landowners deal with the aftermath.
When we first came onto this property and looked at it, it was severely burned, one of the worst burns on this whole bucksnort fire. All the trees, all age brackets and sizes were burnt totally. The needles were removed completely.
As Pittman and his crew worked on this property on the reservoir's west side, he also paid attention to what other nearby landowners were doing. And he didn't like what he saw.
The loggers that were around the area were in here basically to salvage merchantable material, pile the brush, and move on. They didn't really do a lot of the cleanup work with the small non-merchantable material. As we go by, you'll see the slash piles scattered out there. There's not very many, there's not a lot of fine fuels in those slash piles, so I think they'll have a hard time getting those to burn this next year.
Make no mistake, Pittman's crew has looked for trees that can be sold as saw logs or as pulp. But they're returning what can't be sold directly to the ground.
The soil itself, again, that's why we're doing the chipping, is to try to get as much organic material out on there to prevent any type of erosion that may occur if we do get some kind of cloudburst later on in the summer. That's our biggest concern, is just get organic material on the ground to help slow that erosion process. Some tree planting on
Pittman also has taken special precautions in the draw which runs through the property. Along with the chipping, his crew has placed log barriers to catch sediment washed down by rain. Pittman also wants native grass to reestablish itself here, but the dry spring has frustrated that effort.
This is some of the native seed mixture that we sprayed here. It was a bucksnort mixture recommended by the NRCS and the Conservation District. We applied it pretty heavy here, even though they aerial seeded it. This is a draw that I'd like to get a good stand of grass in. This was seeded a couple weeks ago. We just haven't had the moisture and it hasn't germinated yet.
While Pittman was working with a single landowner on the west side of Canyon Ferry, across the reservoir on the east side he faced a different problem. Here, fire had burned through an area which will eventually become the Canyon Ferry Crossing subdivision. And among Pittman's challenges was restoring the subdivision's designated nature area.
This is their conservation corridor, which lies at the heart of the subdivision, and it's an area that's preserved or kept in a natural state for both wildlife and aesthetics of the property. Now, when the fire came through here, this was a dog hair stand of ponderosa pine saplings, and I'd guesstimate that about 80% of them were cooked. The needles were gone, they were starting to get bugs in them. All the buds on the trees that were dead, they were fried.
Pittman's approach here was to hire a team of contractors who removed most of the dead trees, chipped all of them, and then planted 10,000 new trees.
But when they planted the seedlings, we had good soil moisture and they microsited all these seedlings. They got them close to stumps. If they were planted out in the open, they tried to make sure there was some shade over that root collar. Anything to kind of break that heat around that root collar and give the seedling a chance to survive.
Of course, one of the primary considerations here is that eventually this area will sprout homes as well as trees. And while some sections of the conservation corridor still have thick clusters of pine and juniper, Pittman believes he has made this ground more fire resistant while keeping a natural look.
We definitely reduced the fuels, and we spaced these trees out, the saplings out, kind of in a thinning process, and improved the stand so that we, again, reduced the fuels. Therefore, the intensity of fire that would come through here would be more of a natural roll, more of a low fire. It's not susceptible to a crown fire, and it has some opportunity to, again, play a natural role in the system.
I've driven log truck for over 35 years.
How many miles?
Oh, 100,000 miles a year plus for 35 years.
3.5 million.
Yeah, it comes out about that way. Super. Keep track of me again. Bye-bye.
6 a.m. on a June morning, and Leroy Christofferson already has been on the road for an hour and a half, driving from Missoula to just south of Darby.
2 mile right, empty.
Just for the record, Christofferson operates more than 20 log trucks, plus a fleet of log loaders out of his Missoula base. This morning, he's headed to the North Fork of Rye Creek to pick up his first load of the day. And it isn't long before he passes evidence of last year's fires.
I see a lot of forest devastation caused by the fires. Some new regeneration, very sparse in some areas.
"6:30 a.m., and Christofferson stops to allow a loaded log truck to pass. Half an hour later, Christofferson reaches his destination.
I'm here at the pickup.
Okay, yeah, just drop straight down off of the end of that on that spur road on that corner. Oh, right there. And I'm just down below you.
Thanks.
On this particular job, Christofferson is working with Grimm Logging out of Oregon. The loading zone is located 13 miles up the North Fork of Rye Creek, and the loading itself will take about 20 minutes. The operation moves from log deck to log deck, and once it's complete, Christofferson prepares to leave the area and begin his downhill run. This load is bound for Stimson lumber in Bonner, 81,000 pounds of fire-killed fir. Christofferson is right on schedule.
That was very well done. That's excellent operation.
On the way down, Christofferson pauses again, this time for uphill traffic. The brief stop provides an opportunity to look at the fire-scorched landscape of the Rye Creek drainage.
Well, I think we have a real opportunity to practice what we've learned in logging and managing our forests from several different aspects. How a forest grows, how it matures, what it takes to keep it going, and reap the rewards for lumber, logging, and environment and all. It all goes together. We're very lucky to be able to practice in this area.
Then it's back down the road, toward the mill and toward the 2 other loads Christofferson hopes to make today in other parts of western Montana. One more long day in a 35-year career.
Yeah, it's my livelihood. It's not only a job, it's something I enjoy. I have a degree in forestry, so I consider this job, what I do, is just part of the process of farming the forest, taking care of another crop.
As we've seen, the greatest concerns these days in fighting wildland fires are the lives and property of private citizens. And as more homes are built in or near the woods, firefighters will have an even bigger job defending them. So what's the lesson of last year? Simply put, if more homes and private land could survive a wildfire without help, firefighters could spend more time containing fires and protecting forest resources. Here are some examples of what private landowners have been doing since last summer. July 1977. Fire roars through Pattee Canyon southeast of Missoula, destroying homes and blackening timber. For many people, that event brought home the dangers inherent in wooded suburban areas, what professional land managers called the wildland-urban interface. In layman's terms, homes in the forest. In more recent years, other populated drainages received frightening reminders of just how vulnerable they are to fire. In the landmark fire season of 1994, a couple of fires made residents nervous in the Grant Creek drainage northwest of Missoula. And just this spring, a controlled burn on private land in the Colorado Gulch area in Grant Creek got away when high winds rekindled it virtually out of the ashes. Ironically, that fire happened just as Colorado Gulch residents were embarking on a significant effort to reduce fire danger. For retired Highway Patrol Officer Harvey Olsen, that means removing dead limbs from his trees and flammable material from the ground. For other homeowners, it's meant removing trees that pose a threat to their homes. And it's meant removing excess trees from the neighborhood's 10-acre common area.
We have about 33 houses up in this Colorado Gulch neighborhood, and we decided as a group that we needed to do something for fire prevention, and we were fortunate that Judy Barker, who's a fellow homeowner and also a professional forester, was able to help us coordinate the project. We had talked for probably the last 5 or 6 years about doing something just to improve the habitat of the common area and also to make it more useful and just to, to maintain the forest and keep a better, make it look better. So I think we probably would do it anyway. But last year, of course, the fire season definitely got us kind of kicked into high gear.
People are really aware of the problem now because it's been in their backyard, it's been in their front yard. And with the potential of another extreme fire season, people are asking a lot of questions and wanting to know what they can do to protect themselves. This is the kind of thing that needs to be done in their backyard to reduce the hazards if you live in a wooded area. So what we're trying to promote here is community effort, and this is a really excellent example of what a community can do if it pulls together and does it for themselves instead of having agencies come in and do it for them. Just an excellent example of what neighborhoods can do to help protect themselves.
It's been great how the whole Homeowners Association, we've all chipped in to do individual clearing around our yards in our own private space, and everybody's been great about doing that. And you've probably noticed all the different piles of logs along the driveways and everything. So it's been a great unifying thing for the neighborhood. It's brought us all together.
It would seem obvious that the place to begin fire prevention on private property is with the landowner. But land and homeowners don't always have the resources, the time, or the knowledge to do the kind of work their property needs. One Montana fire district has made it easier for its residents. "10 miles west of Missoula, the local volunteer fire district in Frenchtown has embraced the concept of defensible space in a big way.
In a large wildland fire, numerous homes are threatened. And even large fire departments who have lots of equipment and personnel can't be at every house in those type of events.
Frenchtown is home to one of 7 pilot projects for the National FireWise Communities Program. Thanks to some locally developed software, firefighters can look at the fire danger for any home in the district by computer.
It also lets a homeowner realize the hazards that are associated with fires. A lot of them are shocked at their scores and are concerned. Last year has helped us out quite a bit in the fact that it opened up a lot of people's eyes because of the homes that were lost in the state.
And if showing a homeowner the risks isn't enough.
The red dots identify the high hazard homes in the area.
The department will even come fix the problem. The Frenchtown district received a grant from the state and federal governments to do this work for 2 years. The district began advertising its service in June, and Waldron hopes word will spread from neighbor to neighbor.
All the homeowners we've been dealing with are very receptive to the idea. It's not a clear cut, it's just a removal of small unwanted trees.
Well, what we're trying to create is we're trying to create an area of defensible space so that in the event of a fire, we could defend this house. We'll get rid of all the flash fuels, which is primarily what this trimmer is used for, get rid of small brush and small pine trees. We also use a chainsaw to take care of some of the larger fuels. Well, it looks like we'll go about right to the satellite dish there, just on this side of the satellite dish.
Yeah, just stay on this side of the satellite dish, as Scott said.
Ken Oudenhoven and his wife moved to the Frenchtown area just last year. One fire season was enough to show them what they had to do.
I felt that it needed to be done. It was just something that I couldn't get at, and that's the whole thing. So I appreciate the fact that somebody would come in and do something for me that I knew that I couldn't get at right away and get done. There was too many other things that needed to be done around here.
But you see the improvement right away.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, the Frenchtown district also is targeting homes that haven't even been built yet. Waldron has worked with the Missoula County Commissioners and County Attorney on voluntary fire safety permits. This hillside represents the first step.
When we first found out that this subdivision was going to be developed, we got with the developer, discussed our concerns about fire safety, and asked if we could work with him to develop the fire safety permit and to make his subdivision safer from wildland fire.
The developer agreed, and Elk Watch Estates became the first subdivision in Missoula County to receive a fire safety permit, which means it will meet standards for roads, water supplies, and defensible space. Waldron is serious enough about the permits that if a developer doesn't go along, the Frenchtown district will urge that the development be rejected.
Our responsibility is to let the homeowners know about the risk and then to encourage them and work with them to reduce that risk.
Smoke rises above the upper Rye Creek drainage. It's not from a wildfire, even though conditions on the ground indicate another big fire season may be on the way.
The trees are so dry that even though this is green slash, and was only put on the ground just this winter, it hasn't even had a season to dry. It's still consuming very well, and it's very dry already. It's gonna be darn interesting.
And so Matt Arno and his crew take what may be their last opportunity to fight fire with fire. This is private land, owned by Texas businessman Max Watson. He hired Arno's Woodland Restoration Company to work on up to 3,000 acres of his property, thinning out the thickest timber.
There's way too many suppressed trees. There's quite a bit of dead fuel on the ground, and that forest would probably not survive a wildfire.
And burning out ground fuels, both old and new.
There was a large amount of old, down, woody debris that would probably have been enough to burn this stand up in a wildfire. There's still some fuel left on the ground and there's some woody debris, but it's really probably not enough to sustain much heat in a wildfire. So we've accomplished two things. We've thinned the forest and put it in more healthy condition, and we've made it much more fire safe.
This kind of work requires proper weather conditions. And on this day in mid-May, the dryness of even green branches already has Arno worried.
Yeah, well, you would hope it'd be wetter than this in mid-May. I'm pretty surprised, and really we had some rain last week and it pretty much stopped us. It was too wet to burn, but obviously 4 or 5 days later it's getting almost too dry already again.
So far on this property, Arno's crew has worked on between 200 and 300 acres, less than 1/10 of the total goal. This kind of work requires a landowner who is motivated, even if only by fear of the worst.
The cougar fire was just across the Skalkaho Road up here, and I think that's one of the things that really got the landowner thinking about, would his forest be able to survive a wildfire? We were already doing some work up here, but I really got the impression that all the smoke and the fire being pretty close and knowing that it could make it over to this property, that it really got the landowner thinking, I really want to do something so that my forest can survive a wildfire.
It should be emphasized again that no one really knows what the 2001 fire season will bring. Some of the most traumatic events in Montana fire history didn't happen until late August or even September. Meanwhile, homeowners have access to a lot of information on fire prevention and fire safety, including the National FireWise Communities Project. Homeowners who want to learn more can contact their local fire department, the State Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, or the Forest Service. But even as we look ahead to the rest of this summer, there still are contentious issues left over from the fires of 2000, especially on Montana's national forests. You'll be hearing a lot more in the weeks to come about how federal land managers and members of the public want to address fire-related issues on those lands. Finally, we all should recognize the resiliency of nature. With very few exceptions, life has returned to the areas burned last summer. Yes, it's a different landscape, but change is unavoidable in the natural world, and since it's happened, we should appreciate the changes to come, even if they don't happen as quickly as we might wish. We should watch and listen for the lessons in the ashes, and do our best to learn from them. I'm Ian Marquand. Thanks for watching.